Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the final graveyard session of Josie's Books and Blogs Fair 2021. In introduction, I must say I'm very, very pleased that Zahira and her team decided to go along and do a virtual JBBF this year. We all missed it last year, and it's certainly become a fixture on my calendar. I was saying to Zahira the other day that the first one I ever did was quite soon after my mum passed away, and it, in a sense, saved my sanity and my sense of purpose because it reassured me that people are still reading and that there is still work to be done. So, welcome to our participants. Sue Nyathi, Farah Fortune, and Ayanda Xaba on this very illustrious panel. You can see the beautiful book that we're going to be launching today. I hope you can all see that on your screen. And it's, of course, also in the virtual background behind me. But I want to show you also the back cover because it's got two really beautiful faces on the front and back covers. And I do urge you all to go out and buy this really important gem of a little book. It's a collection of short stories edited by Sue, and it is something that has been sorely needed, I think, in our current post-Me Too, still in lockdown situation where we know that the levels of gender-based violence in our society are very high normally, and we've been told through statistics that they've really increased in the last year and a half. So I think a really important contribution both to the literary scene, but also to the conversations we ought to be having as a society around the issue of gender-based violence, whether that's in the home, in the workplace, in general, when women don't feel safe to walk down the street or enter a subway or take public transport, etc. All of those, and of course, more situations. So as I said earlier, welcome to you all in the audience. Welcome to the fabulous team representing this book today, editor Sue Nyathi, and two of the contributors, Farah Fortune and Ayanda Xaba. Sue, I'm going to hand over to you to do a brief self-introduction, and then we'll move both to Ayanda and Farah, if that's okay. Brief, just a couple of lines about yourself, and let's take it from there. Before we do that, though, just a reminder that this session is being recorded as well as live streamed. So by remaining in the room, the audience, you are agreeing to being recorded or being live streamed. If you have issues with that, you may keep your video off. If you even don't want your audio to be heard, you can put questions, etc., in the chat function on the Zoom. So there are options for everybody. I will be checking the chat fairly regularly. Munira will be monitoring the chat on the Facebook stream as well. And we will try and ensure that everybody's comments and questions get highlighted. Over to you, Sue.
Hi, everyone. Hope you had a good afternoon so far. I'll briefly introduce myself. I always start by saying I'm an investment analyst by passion and a writer, by profession and a writer by passion. And, for the past 3 years, I've been, writing full time and nurturing that passion. I've written 3 novels, all fiction, and this is actually my first my stab at editing an anthology. And I write in the introduction that I was inspired, what inspired me to actually do an anthology on gender-based violence. And, I think it's so important, that we start to speak out, to hear those personal narratives, as opposed to just compiling statistics around the violence.
Thank you, Sue. I have to say, as an editor myself, well done on a job, very, very well done. I am thoroughly enjoying the anthology. As I said to you yesterday, there's a part of me that wants to read story after story and just gobble it up as one big, enormous meal. And then there's another part that says, no, hang on, let's savor each one. These stories are each so important. So thank you for a great job done on the editing of that. Farah, would you like to come in here and introduce yourself?
Hey, everybody. My name is Farah Fortune. I am the director and owner of African Star Communications. I am a mom to somebody who thinks they're my mom. She's only 16. And I was very honored to be asked and to participate in the book. It was such a gut-wrenching experience, but yet such a satisfying experience, you know, having that conversation with myself and putting it out there as well for others. I also work very much within the women empowerment field, and I currently run an NPO called the Pad Run, where we supply sanitary pads and sanitary wear, as well as menstruation workshops around the country to young girls and boys about menstruation.
Fantastic work and very important work. Thank you. Ayanda, over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Well, I don't know what to say after Farah. I should have went first. I'm a writer of fiction from Ladysmith in KwaZulu-Natal. And when we started this project with Sue, I did not expect that it was going to come out the way that it did eventually. I remember when I submitted this story, it was something not so personal. And then when the editing started, it shifted towards what it became. And I did not realize that I needed to release it for my own healing and, you know, to be able to allow other people to be able to see themselves in my story and also get that leap into your healing journey as well. It's also my first contribution that is nonfiction. Yeah, I guess that's all for the introduction.
Thank you very much, Ayanda. I'm a writer and editor. I've written mainly nonfiction up to now because I don't actually submit my fiction or my poetry often. But it's in that mode of both writing and editing a lot of nonfiction that I'm really very pleased to be part of this panel. So I'm going to start the discussion, kick off the discussion with you, if I may, as the editor, but also as a writer yourself. In the introduction to this volume, you note quite harrowingly the several of the many incidences of gender-based violence that you suffered yourself and what the kickoff point for this anthology was. Would you like to take us through that?
Yeah, so I in the beginning, I share with the reader that, you know, I was sexually abused at a young age. And, you know, I didn't understand what was happening then, and I had no words to articulate it. You know, I mean, and additionally, the person who abused me, you know, swore me to secrecy around the abuse. And that's what happens a lot with abuse. You know, it flourishes in silence. And it was only later, when I was, you know, when I was reading in a book, that I realized what had happened to me. You know, and then, you know, it clicked. You know, this was not right. What happened to you was wrong. And that's where the awareness came. So it was from reading it in a book. And so for me, that became very important, an important medium, because later on, when I was much older, um, I read another book where it was a memoir where a woman spoke of her own abuse. And I reached out to her because I was like, okay, so this is quite prevalent, right? Before, I mean, before I was just reading it in a fiction novel, but now this is someone I know, I've seen, and she's talking about it. And luckily I had her number, and I texted her, you know. And so we had these back and forth messages. And that for me was actually the first time, you know, I was actually, you know, talking about this experience. And so when I was later giving a talk during the 16 days of a gender-based violence campaign, that my talk, you know, also helped someone else in the audience to come out about their own abuse. And so I realized that there's power in sharing, you know, how your testimony can spark off someone else's healing. And so this is why the book became very important for me as a project to say, you know, we need to speak out more, and somehow, you know, we'll be able to help someone else, because the worst thing you can do to someone who's been abused is to tell them to keep quiet about it. because then they internalize the shame and it just creates so many other problems.
Thank you, Sue. That's a very moving introduction to the motivation behind this book. And I just want to add that in the actual introduction of the book, you note that you were 7 years old when you first experienced sexual violence, and then you note other instances as an adolescent, as a young woman, and even into middle age. And I think that's so important, because I believe that until the global Me Too movement really started getting people to talk about these experiences, we were very silenced as women, that this kind of abuse really thrives on the secrecy, as you say in your introduction, as you said just now. So thank you again. Ayanda, I'm going to come to you next, because for me, one of the stories that really stand out in the collection for me is your story. And you begin it in a way that's really poignant, and it made me think, and I'm sure it made others think about their own experiences. You say that up until today, I'm paraphrasing here, but you say you dread the sight of long male fingers. Do you want to take us a little bit through the catalyst for your story?
As I said earlier, the story started as a general thing of how many abuse cases are silenced. Like, you'd be scared to talk because you're scared of what other people are going to say and all of that. And then as I was writing, as the story was going back and forth between me and Sue, I started to remember the incident, to remember what happened after, and what's happening with me now. And the thing with the fingers, it's something I realized very, very late. I actually do shy away from looking at hands at all. It's certain gentlemen's hands. And then it only went back then, oh, it's because this is the experience I had with a certain man's hands who had this physique as well. So it was also a starting point for me to actually go back to the date to say, why am I belittling this experience if it went on and had such a big impact on me? Because I always like, it's past. It didn't really rape me anyway, So the fingers thing also helped me to realize that it actually did affect more than I thought it did.
Mm-hmm. Ayanda, if you don't mind, I'm going to share my screen here just with the beginning of your story, because I think, it's so incredibly powerful, what you've just said there, and what you say after that. So I'm sharing the screen. I hope you can all see that. And it's the story starts like this. I dread the sight of long fingers, the kind that belongs to tall, skinny guys. It took me years to realize this about myself, almost as long as it took for me to be able to say I was almost a victim of date rape. It only dawned on me after a friend remarked how I always shied away from looking at men's hands. I was surprised by her comment. I'd been doing it unconsciously. I never wanted to confront that part of the male body that had violated me, his hands. And then really poignantly, Ayanda goes on to say, I was born in a town that is known for violence. And she goes on to talk about the early 1990s, a time of extreme violence, of course, in our country. And I want to then tie, that
Ayesha,
aspect.
sorry
Yes,
to intrude.
go
It's
ahead.
not sharing your screen, so I'm not sure if you wanted it to share the actual passage that you're reading, but it's
I
not sharing.
I did want it to share. I'm going to quickly put that back on, I
Sorry
think.
about that.
That's all right. Well, I have read it out, and I'll put it back on in a little while, because I want to share something from from another story as well, and possibly from Celeste's too. But I think, for me, the really powerful juxtaposition of Ayanda's dread of hands, for somebody else, it might be dread of a face, dread of a specific body part, even something as seemingly non-objectional as an ear, perhaps. For me, I know it's the sight of men in uniforms, because we used to have big burly policemen storm into our homes in the early hours of the morning. And that's a story for another day. But for me, every time I see a man in uniform, it triggers me. So we have different triggers. And for Ayanda to juxtapose her trigger, those hands, with the general violence that engulfed our country in the 1990s, but that has continued to affect the psyche of our collective society, is truly important, because in a sense, men who were emasculated in the public sphere then became abusers in the private sphere. And I think that's an important element that several of the stories in this anthology bring out. And I'm going to segue from that to Celeste, to Taryn, who talks specifically, not Taryn, sorry, I've been reading too many of the stories, to Farah, who talks specifically about sexual harassment in the workplace, in the corporate world, in her story. Farah, do you want to please come into the discussion and tell us a little bit about what catalyzed your story?
I think for me, it was, when I actually wrote the story, it was one of probably maybe the second time I'd ever really, besides the people involved in it and the people I had to speak to at the time, it was probably the second time I'd actually spoken about it. It wasn't something that I continued to speak about, but however it played out in my life very prominently, in the sense that, I run a public relations agency, and for the past 13 years, I've never hired a man. I've never had a man in the office as an employee. I've never wanted men around the women that worked in the office, because I was always wanted to create a safe environment. And I think that was one of the reasons, that came from that. I think that was the catalyst for why I work so prominently within the women empowerment field, because I want women to succeed, but I also want them to feel safe, which I think in a lot of workplaces, so many women are harassed, or it's the microaggressions, or, things like that you don't necessarily think there's enough to go to HR with, but you feel uncomfortable enough to go to work. So I never wanted to create an environment where women would come to work, for me anyway, and feel like that. So I've never hired a man in 13 years, and even our suppliers have all been, women. And I think it's been such a huge part of why, even when I try and hire people in my home to fix things, it's women I try and hire. So it leaves that it's like dusting something and leaving that residual dust back, that it always affects something, and something doesn't shine as brightly. And I don't think you realize how it does affect you in the workplace when you are not comfortable going to work, when it's a touch of the arm, or touching your bum, or or you and to them it's nothing. To that person, it's nothing, but to you, it's like, you've invaded my space, you've invaded my personal space. And going through an experience like that, for me, I didn't realize how triggering it was, I think, until I really thought back, writing all of this, just wow, it really affected my life. It really affected how I run my life, how I run my business, how I deal with people. Just, I even going to a meeting, I know it sounds really bad, but when I know it's just going to be predominantly men, I'm purposefully a minute or so late to make sure there's other people in the room, so that I'm not by myself. So it's all of those things. And even just setting up meetings, I'm always, who else is going to be there? Who else is going to be around? It's my experience in the book, where I spoke about being in a boardroom alone with someone on a Friday afternoon, and there's no one else in the office. When you're starting a business, you don't think about things like that. You don't think it affects you. But how I've lived through my business as the years have gone on, I realized how I'm purposefully, and I know it's not the most professional thing to be, but I know when it's predominantly men, I am purposefully like, I don't want to just be the only woman in the room. I don't want to be there alone with anybody. And people, they always look at you, you're like, oh, you're such a strong woman. And it's nothing, I hate them being called a strong woman. And you don't want to constantly have to be strong to go to a meeting.
Absolutely. You shared two very vivid experiences in your book, Farah, but one of them, that meeting in the boardroom, and you're now saying you go deliberately late to meetings. I have a friend who endured a similar experience, and she says to me that she still has to deal with somebody who harasses her verbally. And every time she has a meeting where this particular person is involved, she basically tells me, I dress down. I make sure I'm covered. I'm more covered than I would normally bother about, in the workplace. And we really shouldn't have to be doing these things. We shouldn't have to be censoring how we speak or how we dress or how the image that we project as women, because somebody else feels they have a right to harass us, whether that's verbally, whether that's in writing, or whether that's actually physically. So I want to come back to you here. I made that comment quite deliberately about Ayanda's juxtaposition of her personal experience and our communal or societal experience as a nation. And then again, quite deliberately went into Farah's story, because that kind of takes it out of the sphere of the private into the sphere of the public. And there are several stories in this collection that do exactly that. How did that work for you in framing the narrative and the flow between the stories?
Okay, so I was very intentional in that I wanted to tell the story of saying, the violence is everywhere. It's in the home, it's outside the home, it's in the office, it's within the family, it's, in the different relationships, so that it, people understand that it's not just, in the home, it's everywhere. And so it was then the difficulty was now to find stories that speak to every aspect of it, right? Because I think it's also very important that we don't rank abuse and say, physical abuse is worse than emotional abuse. They're both bad. We shouldn't. And so I wanted to show how all of them are bad. We can't say one is better than the other, because there's no better. They're all bad. And so it was important to show all the stories, across, the different places, across the different kinds of relationships. Um, but like you say, the difficulty in that is in finding people. It's not like I can say, well, we're advertising for financial abuse stories. It doesn't work that way. So it's just trying to now get a balance in terms of what you get and how you can then, once you have all these stories, how are you going to then compile them so that there is some sort of flow and grouping in a way. As you can see, the book has been ultimately laid out.
Yes. Yes, thank you, Sue. And from the comments coming in on the chat, somebody saying it hasn't stopped, unfortunately. Someone else saying we need to be aware and look out for each other. And actually, kudos to you, Farah, for doing that, for creating a woman-centered work environment, and even ensuring that your suppliers and the people you deal with on a day-to-day basis, and your staff deal with on a day-to-day basis, are largely women. I think that's important. Some might say it's sexist, but I think it's important not only from the viewpoint of gender-based violence, but just in terms of the discrimination that women in this country have historically and globally have historically suffered. I'd like to actually bring in something here. Again, it's a screenshot from the first story in the book. So I'm going to share my screen with you all, and then hope that you can all see that.
Yes, it's showing, Aisha.
Okay, great. This is the first story by Robin Porteous, I think it is. And what really struck me here was, oh, sorry, okay, I got it back, was this bit. She says, we live in a world where if you survive, because it's not a given that you will, the trauma had better have been bad enough to ensure that you can justify your right to life in the eyes and minds of everyone and anyone who hears about it. You've got to earn your right to recognition as a victim. For me, this speaks to what Sue says about, it's not just rape or physical violence that needs to be highlighted. It's emotional abuse, it's verbal abuse, etc. And this then goes on to say, and you can read it on the screen, we live in a world where rape is the only crime for which the argument that the temptation to commit it was too much to resist, to the point where it is treated as a defense for the crime. For every other crime, this would be considered a confession. And she goes on to say on that same page, I'm not going to read the whole thing, because it took years for me to find my way to say I'm okay and mean it. And she goes on to say a little further on, because it nearly killed me. And I think, that is a message that resonates throughout this collection. It takes years for women to find the courage, the lack of shame, the confidence to come forward and speak. And it takes so much strength of all kinds and support before they can say that they're okay and mean it. I think we really need to think about those words. Before I can say I'm okay and mean it. And with that, Ayanda, I want to come back to you and your story, and generally the way you framed that story about feeling violated, about feeling that you had something to apologize for, when in fact the blame lay in the opposite direction. Do you want to take it from there?
This is a very difficult discussion. This thing, the page that you just read by Robin, reminded me of after writing the book, and the book is published, and there's updates that the book is going to be released. I started getting really anxious that now do I have to speak about it? Am I okay to speak about it? Like, am I okay about this whole thing? Why did I share? I started getting very anxious about this. So I saw someone, a professional, and she told me that it's okay not to be okay, even now. It happened when you were 16. You had to bury it down because society blames and everything. But I realized also the way the story ends, it says, I'm yet to know if it's hate or it's fear that was instilled in me by that incident. So this thing of saying, we're okay, I'm not sure if we ever get to that point of saying okay and actually mean that we're okay. But I think with the resources that are now available for us and being able to share, being able to speak about it has also helped in my own journey personally to actually say, I'm actually okay now, like I'm getting there. Even the fear of romantic relationships is starting, because there's when you try to be intimate with a partner, there's always going to be those triggers, something that's going to take you back, and all of a sudden you're clamping up, and this person doesn't understand. You can't really say, at that moment, you can't say, actually, when I was 16, this person did this, so you got to understand the impact of that, and then just work through that point of saying you're okay.
Thank you, Ayanda. I know that was difficult. And on that point, I know that this is a conversation in a book launch that could prove triggering for members of the audience as well. But as somebody noted in the chat, it can also be cathartic and empowering to share your experiences. So if somebody feels that they would like to share, but perhaps don't want to do so audibly and visibly, please feel free to reach out on the chat as well, and to say, I empathize with this, or I, actually identify with this because something similar happened to me. Because I think it's important to feel that we're held in this kind of space. Farah, in your experience that you document, not the one where you were alone in the boardroom with somebody after hours, but the other experience when you were actually working in the UK, you document an experience of harassment, and then a realization. And again, I'm going to quickly share your screen, my screen, about your story there, because I think that in itself is so powerful, what happened in the aftermath of that. So this is, I'm still on the old screen. It's this one here. She goes on to say, Ian stopped harassing me. This is after she reported the harassment and took some leave. I also took a few days off. My colleagues weren't informed why he had gone off work. Then she says, I returned to work before Ian did. The moment I walked into the building, I was asked to see my supervisor. He handed me a scrapbook. It was a diary of my life and even contained pictures of me. It detailed what I ate, where I lived, things I had said on certain days, what time I would arrive at and leave work, my number plates, etc. The book belonged to Ian. Gavin had discovered it on his desk while looking for documents to reallocate his work. It was only then that I discovered he'd been keeping tabs on me since the day I had started working there, or we had started working together. And she goes on to say that he was then reallocated to another division, but didn't leave, and he was offered help with his problem. Farah, so for me, that documents not only verbal harassment, but an actual type of stalking that you had to deal with. And how did it feel knowing that this man was still working in that company, that he hadn't effectively been brought to any kind of justice? What did that do to you?
I think it was my first real experience of how there's no accountability. There's just no accountability for harassment, sexual harassment, verbal harassment, GBV. There's just no accountability. And if there is, it's very few times. And it was so detrimental to my mental health and how I had relationships for a very long time after that experience, because I couldn't understand how he was able to keep his job. I couldn't understand how he was just nicely shoved to another department in a different building and in another part of town, but he never there was no apology, there was no sorry, there was no accountability, there were no consequences for him whatsoever. And I've never, to this day, I still don't understand how that ever happened. And I don't know if it was a case of, this was maybe almost 20 years ago, so maybe it was a different time and how it was handled at that time. But I still feel like there should have been some sort of accountability. He should have been suspended, lost pay, lost his job, but something should have happened, and it never did. And that's never sat well with me. And the lack of accountability, the lack of any consequences has always been something that, or something that for a very long time made me very angry. And I had to walk around with that anger. He caused all of this, but I had to sit with all the aftermath of what happened with it. I had to sit with, oh my God, somebody knows, this person knows where I live. They know what time I leave work. They know where I go. They have my number. They have all these intimate details of my life that I wouldn't necessarily share with just anybody, never mind somebody I work with. I just wouldn't share with anyone. And this person knew, I think it scared me so much that he knew so much. Like, where did you find out this information? How did you get it? For you to know where I live, did you follow me home? And all of those things, to the point where I actually moved house, because I was so scared, even though he had moved to another job and he knew now, that everybody else knew. I had to move. I had to live with that anger. I had to be upset and worried and scared that he was going to turn up somewhere, that he was maybe not going to stop. I didn't know what happened after that. And it was so scary living with that. It was such a long time. And there's another incident that I actually didn't speak about in the book, but many years later, one of the first jobs I had when I came back to South Africa, I had a very similar incident, but with a woman with it, also. And at that time I had just had my daughter. My daughter was like a year or 2 years old. And this person knew my child's name and, again, where I lived and all these things. So it triggered so much in me that I was very close to having a breakdown, because I just couldn't believe that I was going through this again, and this time with a woman doing it to me, because this person thought I had interest in them. And you live with that. You live with the scaredness. I mean, even now in my big old age, I'm still scared to tell people where I live, or have people come to my home, or even tell people too many things about me, because I don't want them to know, because I don't know what they're going to do with that information. And now, being a mom, I'm even more scared, because I have a 16-year-old daughter, and I'm always, it's so horrible, but I constantly feel like I'm preparing her for the worst. I constantly feel like I'm preparing her to be harassed, or to be, to deal with GBV in her life. Or it's terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying, knowing that one day she will go out into the world, and at some point, I know for a fact, I can honestly say, she's going to deal with something like this in some way or the other. And that is the most heartbreaking thing as the mom of a young woman, knowing that unfortunately, I can't stop that.
Yeah, absolutely. And as Sue has noticed, now the stalking has migrated to online and social media. And with
Yeah.
us doing banking, identity documents, everything through online media, access to that information becomes so much easier, in senses we keep getting reassured that our information is secure, and then we keep getting told there's been a hack, or there's been a breach, there's been a this, there's been a that. With that, I'd like to open up this conversation now to the members of the audience. If anybody wants to pose a question to the panelists, or share something from their own experience, please raise your hand, and there is a hand raising thing, or just unmute yourself and you can talk to us. I think it's very important that we bring some other voices into this conversation as well. So I don't see any raised, there's one raised hand. Please go ahead.
Hi, it's Munira.
Hi,
So,
Munira.
Farah, thank you so much for sharing that. Sometimes we go through things in our lives, and I think we end up putting it in the back of our mind, and we forget that certain things happened. And you sharing that actually sparked a memory with me. And then when Ayanda spoke about social media, and I recalled having something not as extreme, but something similar, where I host events in my hometown, events for women entrepreneurs. And I had this guy harassing me on WhatsApp. So he had all my details because of the ads that we would place for the events. And I was lucky enough that as soon as it happened, I showed it to my husband. And when he did try to call, my husband answered the phone and made it clear that, there is a man that is around here, that is protecting me, that I'm not alone. But it was really a horrendous feeling, because I knew the event was coming up a few days later, and I knew he knew exactly where the event was. And I was like, I don't know this person from anywhere, and they can show up in the crowd and they can attack me, or they can do whatever they want, and I would not know. So that whole event left me feeling so, and I didn't like feeling like that, feeling so
You were
helpless.
vulnerable.
Yes, that I just needed to have my husband around me, and have, somebody around me just to keep an eye the whole time. So yeah, it actually just sparked that memory, and I just realized how we push things to the back of our minds, and that's our way of coping. Yes.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that, Munira. Before handing over to the panelists to respond, we have somebody else wanting to contribute. Rashida, please go ahead. Rashida, you there?
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me?
We can now, yes.
Okay, lovely. Thanks so much. So I just wanted to, first congratulate Sue and everybody who's contributed. I think it's such an amazing thing, so inspiring for people to share such heart-rending stories. And I know it can take it out of you And there's something that Ayanda mentioned about how anxious she was, towards the launch of it and it becoming aware, getting out there. And it's actually something I heard from another woman author who wrote, Vanessa Ted. I'm sure you guys know her, Beaten Not Broken. I think she was featured on, or her books were featured on Josie's Books and Blogs some time ago. And her anxiety at the time of the launch, So I think it's probably a bit of almost a double-edged sword, because writing of it and talking about it is very, very cathartic, and it helps you to make sense of this horrendous thing that has happened, and it helps you to be able to start the process of moving forward. It will never, like Farah said earlier, it's never completely over. It's always there, and you carry remnants of it in all aspects of your life, which is so sad. But I was trying to say that this is almost a double-edged sword. So you do want to write about it, but if you launching it, and if it's going to be out there to so many people, it's also a worry and a concern for so many other reasons. And how do you balance that out?
Okay, Sue, do you want to take that question and maybe kick off the discussion in response to both of the audience members who've made an input?
Okay, I think it's very difficult to be vulnerable, especially in a book, and putting yourself out there, because people receive these stories in a different way. Some will be empathetic and some will be vicious, right? I mean, I saw someone shared an excerpt of one of the stories, and you had people thinking, well, is it even true? Okay, so it's, or the man was justified. So it's almost like you're having another trial, sort of like a public trial of your trauma once again. So I understand why it would cause anxiety to the contributors. But and I can't speak for all the contributors. They'll have different feelings and ways of trying to deal with the angst, but it will definitely be there. But what I can say personally for me is that it's my truth. I'm speaking my truth, and I'm no longer having the debate of whether it's real or not. I've had those kind of arguments in my own head about certain things, but the fact that it's out there for me has healed me, and so I'm letting it go. It's out of me now. It's just out there in the world. And then I just wanted to respond to the comment that Munira made about having to reach out to her husband. And it's such a prevalent thing for women. It's like you have to have sort of a male bodyguard to scare away other men. And it becomes challenging for us single women. Like, I'm single, right? And oftentimes if there's someone who has to come and fix something in the house, I have to lie. I have to say, oh, my husband will be here just now, just to give them this awareness that there's a male presence there. Because as soon as they know that you're a single woman living alone, it becomes a problem. And I remember the one time I had my geyser fixed, and the guys, where they were supposed to screw something on, which they didn't do. And then he called me and he said, I can come by Monday afternoon. Will you be there? And I'm saying, but why didn't you finish it? He says, it's just a little bolt that I need to screw. I said to him, no, don't come. Because now he's coming alone. He's not even coming with the team. And what happens if anything happens? It's just me and him. I can't call the company and say your guy, because they'll think it's something we arranged off the radar. So there's also this thing that it's either, whenever I deal with men, it's either I have to call another man that I know to be there, or pretend there's a man there, so to act as a barrier. And it's hard, so you're always on guard all the time.
Absolutely, and I think that's an experience that's certainly not unique to you as a single woman in this country. I know I've had it as well. I've called a friend to just come there and pretend to be the male in the house, or my nephew to come there and be my son, just so that there's a sense that she's not alone. Ayanda, do you want to respond to Rashida's comment about your piece specifically?
I'm sorry, my memory is a bit. I remember she said something about the fear and being able to, the fear of talking about it. I think Sue has also touched on that.
Yes.
it also, what Sue just said about having to have a male person who's close to you who's gonna help you. One of my biggest fears after heights, of course, is being killed by my partner. Having had to experience sexual violence and physical violence, emotional abuse as well, from your sexual partners, that's something that's always at the back of my mind. And when the book came out, and all these talks about launches and stuff, I spoke to my brother, and made me realize that there's women who had to leave, okay, they're not alive anymore, but they had to experience that and actually die in the hands of people who were close to them, and they thought, okay, this is the person who's going to protect me should there be danger from the outside. So that also made me realize that me speaking about my story is also I'm being a voice for those who did not make it out, because I fought and I got out of the room and I got out of the relationship, I got out of the township, but other people never make it out. So that's something that actually made me to say, okay, Sue, I can do a discussion or two, because I realized that I can be somebody else's voice, somebody who never made it out of that relationship, or whatever circumstance that made them to die in the hands of a man.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for that, Ayanda. I think it's important, because I remember having a student in my human rights program at WITS some years back, about 12, 13 years ago, who had actually, she was living on the program here in Johannesburg, obviously had entered the country on her real name, but was registered on the program because of her circumstances on an assumed name, because she was afraid that she'd be stalked and harassed online, even into South Africa, for the 6 months that she was going to be here. So this is an enduring problem that women almost need to reinvent themselves to get away at times from the harassers. As you say, you were lucky enough to get out of that township. And I believe you said even when you now go back home, your mother has moved to a different area. So you no longer have to go to that particular township and relive the sort of physical site of that violence. Farah, would you like to come in here in response to Munira's comment?
Sure. I completely get where she's coming from. It's something, even to this day, I still deal with. I constantly get asked for meetings. And, I've also learned now, which is quite sad, I've had to learn a series of questions to ask men before we have meetings. Really, what's it about? Can you send me a brief? Is there an agenda, kind of thing? And a lot of the times that roots them out, because if they don't have that, and if they're not professional enough, they won't have all those things together, which could also miss you out on a great business opportunity. But you don't have the luxury of having the choice. You need to have those things in place, because I also get messages constantly about, oh, can we just meet up? No, can we have a conversation? That's fine, on the phone. Let's talk about, what it is. I'm sure I can help you. We don't necessarily need to meet. Also, just the meetings that need to happen after 7 o'clock in a restaurant. No, they don't need to happen. I've had, like I said, have had to root all of those things out, and for years had to go through that and still go through the exact same thing. I've also had to be in situations where, I'm not married, so I can't. I have to ask my male friends, okay, can you come with me to this place? Because I don't want to go alone. Can you come with me and maybe just sit in the car, because I need to hand over documents, and it's documents that this person urgently needs. And I've dealt with them before, and they've never given me a problem, but you just don't know, because it might be 8 o'clock at night. You need to run into a building that you can't email it. They need the physical copies of these original documents. And you're so scared of what could happen, even though you've dealt with the person 1,000 times before. It could just be that one day, it's just not your lucky day. So I've been in those situations. I completely understand where she's coming from. And it's so scary My number floats all over the internet because of work. Everybody's got my number. But then you have these messages that will come in at 11, 12 o'clock at night. Oh, I need to speak to you urgently about business. Can we meet tomorrow? And no, we can't meet tomorrow night. No, we can't. Tell me what you need. And I think one of the, I won't say the best things, but COVID in a way has been a saving grace for me in many things when it comes to dealing with men in the workplace, because now it's not just can we meet face to face. I can say, okay, let's do a Zoom, because it's not safe necessarily to meet someone face to face, especially when you don't know them and you don't know each other's status in terms of health or anything. So in a way that has been really great for me. I've really dodged a lot of bullets in the last year just by doing that. And I don't want to use the pandemic because it hasn't been good to most people, but for me in that sense, it's really helped just say, can we have a Zoom meeting? If you really want this meeting, it's fine, I'll give it to you. I can have it 7 o'clock at night, but it's going to be over, over a laptop. So I understand that. And there's so many instances where even men coming to the office, I just wouldn't have meetings by myself, even in my own office with our own security guards there, just because you're really just not sure. And living like that it's tiring. It's honestly, it's exhausting. Having to constantly worry about who you're meeting, where you're meeting them, what they want to meet you about. I know I've missed out on million rand deals. Like I know I've genuinely missed out on them because I've gone to meetings, even during the day, even in an office full of people, and had, sexual advances towards me or people offering me deals if I just slept with them. And I didn't get the work. And you know what? It's okay, because I don't want to put myself in that situation. And I never blame anybody who does, because at the end of the day, we all have different bills to pay. And I'm never going to judge anyone for what they want to do. But the mere fact that someone can think they can put you in that situation just means that they've done it so many times before, that they are so comfortable doing it with you, and they're so ready for you to say yes, because unfortunately so many women have had to say yes. And that's the saddest thing about being a woman in business. So I completely understand what she was saying about, having a husband there. I mean, if I was married, I'd want my husband half the time too. The poor man probably wouldn't even be able to do his own job because he'd have to be with me. But I completely get it. Totally get it.
Thank you, Farah. I let you, go into quite a lot of detail there, because I think it's important. It speaks to the prevalence of this problem and the transactional nature of the abuse in many instances. Puleng has said the issues of GBV are deep-rooted. I strongly feel men should start working on themselves. The burden should not always remain with the victim. And Munira has asked, has having more control during the pandemic eased things for women? I'd like to invite any burning issues, and then I'm going to do a quick wrap up. But before I do that, because that particular question has been raised by Puleng, I'd like to once more share something from the book with you. And this is actually from the director of the Josie's Books and Blogs Fair, the person who took the initiative to start this up. This is Zahira Jina Asfat's story, where she shares the experiences of 4 different women living in the Muslim community in a patriarchal Muslim society. But what I find particularly telling towards the end of her story, she says, these narratives also tell my story. I live in a patriarchal society where men continue to occupy all the seats on the board of the school committee and neighborhood committee. At family gatherings with my in-laws, the women prepare the meal. They then serve the men and only eat food after the men have eaten. The women clean up after a meal. I am a mother to 3 boys. It is my duty to bring up men who can challenge societies and hold them accountable for the actions of an abusive patriarchy. And yet, I find myself desperately trying to break down the beast of patriarchy that rules my house and community. And even more telling is another story that's from Bongi Mdluli that's now it should now be on your screen, because it's not just Muslim societies. the more I read the stories in the book, the more it becomes apparent that this patriarchy is pervasive. And here Bongi is talking about the advice given to brides before they get married. And she says, I also feel the composition of the group of women imparting advice to a bride must be altered. It should also include middle-aged female professionals. This will help to balance the rigid views upheld by the aged matriarchs. I, like many women, entered this institution not knowing who I was and what I stood for. So my advice to young brides is to find themselves first. And she goes on to say, I still maintain that marriage can be a beautiful institution, especially when you enter it consciously and deliberately. I'm going to stop the share there. And if there are any burning questions, any burning comments, contributions that people want to make, we'll take them. I don't see any hands up, but somebody has said, Togo Madondo has said this is such an important conversation. It brings to light what women must speak about to share coping strategies as well as to co-create policy and structural solutions. Thank you to the voices who have come forward. Your light enables others to burn bright too. With that, I'm going to come to you guys on my panel for a final set of roundup, just a minute to each of you because we're going to be running late otherwise. Ayanda, can we start with you on this round?
I think Sue wanted to say something about the
Oh, is
comment.
that Sue? I'm going to close off with Sue, if that's okay, as the editor.
Okay, closing comment. I really hope our story, people who have read the book, people who are yet to read the book, get also the courage to speak or to share. You don't have to share at a large scale like we did, but being able to talk about what you went through is really important in your healing. This is not to say you'll ever be at a point where you are over it. It's over. Like Farah has said, at this age, she's still affected by something that Ian did all those years ago. And it's always going to come up because she's still a professional woman and she's raising a daughter. And you're also thinking she's going out to school. Something might happen to her at school. There's always reports about men, teachers, caretakers, molesting children in school. You know, it's a constant battle. But I'm just calling out for other women to share, speak about it, find support. It really does make life a little lighter.
Thank you, Ayanda. Farah, any closing thoughts? You're still muted, Farah.
Oh, sorry, I thought I'd unmuted it. I just wanted to say thank you to Sue, for giving everyone an opportunity in the book just to have their say and the people who have never spoken about it before, just like Ayanda said, it's a healing process and it's been amazing for so many of us. But just when it comes to things like abuse, I think, especially if you have children, speak to them from as young as you possibly can. I've constantly spoken to my daughter about what abuse is and what GBV is, and I'm very vocal in my home about harassment. And that's something, I wanted to know how to handle from a young age. And I just hope that as women, we can pass on that knowledge to the next generation of how we can stop these things happening. The lady you were speaking about before, in terms of she's got 3 boys and she feels like her responsibility is to make sure that they go out into the world and then they sort of break down the patriarchal barriers. And that's exactly what we need to do. So whether it's young girls, young boys, we need to make sure that, our next generation are not having to write books about what they're going through.
Absolutely. Before I get Sue to round up, Susie on the chat has said, fascinating insight that COVID/Zoom has served as a protector to some. My concerns always went to those who might have been living in abusive situations. I think she means during the lockdown. And I think the statistics do show that there have been more instances of reported abuse within the home, the domestic situation, since the lockdown began. Sue, over to you.
Yeah, and just to close, I think COVID as well has been good in the sense that and I was speaking to a friend of mine who's a lawyer, and she said the number of divorces post COVID, well, we're still in COVID, but post lockdown have also increased. I think people realize that, they didn't have to stay in abusive situations, that, they don't need to tolerate the abuse anymore. So I think that's also important because the violence has escalated with the job losses, the economy the way it is, that also is a trigger, for men to meet up more violence towards their partners. And like Puleng says, the change begins with men, and most of them don't want to change. They want to hang on to those behaviors, and that's the problem. So I think as we have more conversations around gender-based violence, we need more men to come to the table, because we
Absolutely.
can't change it without them, because they are the perpetrators.
Absolutely. Thank you again, Sue, for having the courage and the insight to initiate this project, for coming up with such a beautiful book. It's aesthetically beautiful. I've showed you both covers, but it's also beautiful in the wide breadth of experiences of South African or Southern African women that it brings to the table. It speaks to us as a society. It tells us that no matter the various backgrounds, ethnicities, class situations, socioeconomics that we come from, that as a nation, this is a pervasive issue, and it needs to be brought into the sunlight. It needs to be talked about so that we can ensure, as Farah said, and as Zahira makes the point in her story, that we don't continue to raise a new generation of abusive men and women, and victims of abuse. So on that note, I just want to thank you all the contributors, not just Sue and the two contributors here today, but all the contributors to this volume. It's a very important volume. And in fact, I for one hope it becomes a teaching text in some institutions around the country. Thank you very much. It's brave of you all. Your courage, as Togo says, helps others to not need to hide their light, enables others to shine bright. So a huge round of appreciation to you all. And to the people listening into this, the people who've participated as members of the audience, thank you too for having the courage to be here, for being the support that the tellers of these tales need in order to be a collective cathartic experience for us all, and empowering, above all, empowering experience for us all. So thank you very much. A huge contribution from you all, and a huge congratulations to the entire team that contributed to this very important book, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Ayesha, for having me.
Mira, any closing comments?
Yes, I would like to thank the audience and definitely thank the panelists as well as you, Ayesha, for an amazing, amazing session. What a powerful one to end off the day and to end off this fantastic festival. Thank you so much to all of you for agreeing to come on board and to join us in our first virtual Jozisbbf. This has been a discussion that is going to be ongoing, because we as women, we need to keep these stories coming out. That's the only way we're going to give the others who are secretly going through all of these kind of experiences the courage to actually come forward. I've just recently heard or actually met a little young girl in our settlement here in Tembelihle, 14-year-old, who was brutally raped by a 59-year-old neighbor, and she's pregnant with his child, and he has AIDS. It's terrible. These are the kinds of things that are still existing in our society, and it breaks my heart to see things like this still happen. But unfortunately, with the way our country is and the way our rural areas are set up, it's become something that's almost the norm for some people, that they've actually become so accustomed to things like this happening. So I do applaud you all for sharing your stories and for being the first women that do speak out in Sue's anthology. Hopefully there'll be much more anthologies, Sue, that you do share with us. Thank you so much. And Ayesha, what a fantastic job as always. I told Zahira. Josie's BBF is not Josie's BBF without you. We do definitely have to have one session with you in the day. So thank you for a fantastic, fantastic session, everyone. Keep well. Have a warm Sunday evening. And thank you so much.
And thank you to Jozisbbf and Zahira and her team as well for making this possible, not only this year virtually, but since its inception. The community that it serves needs a book fair. And it serves, it's not just Lenasia, but the surrounding communities as well. And the diversity of experiences that Zahira has managed to bring to this fair over the years is really a testament to her courage and her determination and passion. So thank you everybody on the JBBF team as well. And I think with that, we need to end the session. We're at 17:38, so sorry for keeping you too late.
Thank you, everyone.
Once again, to the fabulous panelists, thank you. Go and buy the book. It's a brilliant book. Go and buy it. Look at that gorgeous cover on both the front and the back. Go and buy this book.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Congratulations. Bye, everybody.